Hello, good morning. I am Fernando Lara, and I am sorry that I can't be with you in Atlanta today. My daughter is graduating from college today and tomorrow, so I wish I could be there in person. But I want to thank SAH for allowing me to present in this video mode and be in the discussion soon after. And I also want to thank Patricia Del Real and Maria Rosales Pendas for organizing this amazing session. Let me share my screen and start my paper. Descartes and the problem of the void. René Descartes is a rare case of religious consensus. Born 3 decades after the Council of Trent and the new theology of Counter-Reformation, Descartes was raised Catholic and attended the Jesuit college at La Flèche. Despite his devotion to Rome, Descartes' work became the basis of a new theology reconciling science and faith for Catholics and Protestants alike. This presentation paper departs from the theological roots of Descartes' cogito ergo sum to discuss the architectural implications of his theories, a reckoning with colonialism, religion, and its white supremacy grip on reason that is so urgent still with us. Inevitably, this paper also discusses the very philosophical theological problem of defining space as a consequence of the expansion, both the geographic and the intellectual expansion that followed the European occupation of the Americas, a problem to which the dual modernity-coloniality answer by reinforcing disembodiment, a central tenet of this session. As An Yong-tai wrote, the jointly marked categories of religion, race, and the secular often operate in conjunction with the normativity of whiteness. So let's consider for a moment that perhaps the encounter of October 12, 1492 was a cause and not a consequence of European modernization, as Aníbal Quijano and Immanuel Wallenstein argued back in 1992, almost 30 years, more than 30 years ago. Quijano and Wallenstein coined a sentence that has now become a classic. They demonstrated that, quote, it is not that the Americas had significant role in the development of capitalism. There would be no capitalism if not for the occupation of the Americas, unquote. 34 years before Quijano and Wallenstein, Edmundo O'Gorman, by the way, brother of architect Juan O'Gorman, published La Invención de la América, Investigación acerca de la estructura histórica del Nuevo Mundo y del sentido de su devenir. The first English translation was published in 1961. The book is from 1958. In this book, O'Gorman uses cartographic information to demonstrate that it was the encounter with the Americas that triggered a revolution in Europe and not the other way around. The bulk of O'Gorman's argument is that America was invented as an otherness that allowed Europe to place itself as the center. The word for Europeans in the 15th century was formed by three landmasses, Europe, Africa, Asia, surrounded by the Mare Oceano. O'Gorman argues that the possibility of other inhabitable lands was deemed unacceptable by Christianity, for it implied that the Bible was wrong on several accounts. He reminds us that for about a decade after 1492, the European nobility and their scholars thought that Cologne had arrived in the islands of the Far East, Japan and China. Only after Vespucci's voyage of 1501, 1502, it was established that they had reached not Asia, but another landmass that they had no previous knowledge of. The shock of such understanding, triggered a whole epistemological revolution in Europe. Simply put, if the Bible contained no mention of this other landmass, perhaps the Bible should not be taken literally. It is not hard to imagine the impact of this paradigmatic shift in the works of Erasmus, Martin Luther, and Descartes himself. O'Gorman continues in explaining that the invasion of the Americas tears down the medieval notion of the orbis terrarium, the inhabitable world, as an insular entity closely bounded by a menacing ocean, and replaces it with an image of the world as fully masterable, terraqueous globe. Here I need to highlight the concept of masterable, as synthesized by René Descartes in the separation between the mind, res cogitans, and everything else, res extensa. The mind of the European man were now masters of everything else. That is not only land and resources, but also all women and all non-European people. I would highlight the dimension of disembodiment in this theological break, which is of utmost interest to the systematization of design processes that was happening at the exact same time. Let's depart from the fact that Descartes' cogito ergo sum is a direct response to St. Augustine, fallor ergo sum. The difference between the two could not be more clear. Augustine stated his doubt and ignorance. I am deceived, therefore I am. While Descartes stated his rational power and confidence. I think, therefore I am. As we very well know, the evolution of knowledge is based on ignorance. It's based on what we don't know, not on what we already know. Why could René Descartes be so sure of himself, while the whole tradition of thought that preceded him, from Plato to Aristotle to Augustine, and even his philosophical alter ego of Baruch Spinoza, were consumed with doubts? Replacing doubt with certainty allowed Descartes to justify colonialism. It also solved a theological inquiry in the concept of space, the void between objects. In the Battle of the Gods and Giants, Thomas Lennon explained that the main philosophical problem faced by René Descartes was the problem of the void, the space between things. If space is independent from God, then God is not the author of all things. It's not that difficult to see how the theological problem of defining space is a direct consequence of the European occupation of the Americas during the previous century. If I had time, which I don't in this presentation, I would elaborate on people like Pedro Nunes, who wrote Tratado da Esfera, a kind of a pre-Cartesian coordinate published in Portugal in 1537, or Antonio Rubio, who wrote Lógica Mexicana, based on his life among the Nahua in Tenochtitlan, Ciudad de Mexico, in the late 16th century. And this book, we are sure that René Descartes read at the Jesuit College at La Flèche. But for this SAH session, allow me to elaborate on the philosophical theological problem of defining space after the expansion that followed the American invasion. Lennon presents two provisional solutions that came out in the 17th century. One that he calls the apotheosis of space, present in the work of Marin Courreau, in which spatiality is a feature of God, not something different from it. The other provisional solution was presented by François Bernier, implying the minimization or the altogether elimination of the ontological status of space, what Lennon calls the annihilation of space. Descartes' solution to this problem, which was so successful that it became a pillar of Western philosophy, was to separate space, res extensa, from the mind, res cogitans. The Cartesian solution implies that God is everywhere, but his consciousness is in the res cogitans. It liberates space from God, although he still has power over everything. It also, in practical terms, liberates the European man to act upon space, because God has been dislocated to the mind. In that movement, Descartes also elevates one kind of knowledge over another, where everything that can be reduced to mathematical formulas acquires the status of truth. Measurements at large are the main category, but they also include religious ideas and matters of faith, as long as it is Christian faith. It excludes from the higher realm of res cogitans any emotion, feeling, or passion, locating them in nature. As I mentioned at the beginning of this paper, the Cartesian separation of mind and reason from body nature is a rare case of a Christian theological consensus in times of Reformation and Counter-Reformation because it justified colonialism, the unifying European project of the 16th and 17th century. For us, in architectural history, it's paramount to discuss how our discipline fits those developments. There is no question, I think, that architecture as we know it was born from the Albertian, Cartesian, Kantian paradigms of space and representation techniques. Architectural scholarship has scores of books and articles about abstraction, almost all enthusiastically celebrating it as a core component of design. We learn from Anthony Vidler, David Letterbarrow, Kate Nesbitt, that abstraction is the main pillar of modernity. What neither Vidler nor any other architectural theorist has explored so far is the role of the European occupation of the Americas as a major trigger of such transformations. For it was in the Americas that abstraction was being effectively used to control the territory. And I'm showing here a sequence of 3 maps from the Relações Geográficas, all from the 1580s, that show this sequence from a relational understanding of space to a Cartesian understanding of space. And you see on the maps. Lines were imposed upon sites that had very different histories. And as a result, the colonial modern project broke the previous territorial organization and imposed a new order by symbolism. From recent scholarships teaching Descartes, Leibniz, and Newton, we perceive that the rise of abstraction is an index of the modernity coloniality project, which prompts the question of how the Americas participated in the development of abstract space. Of course, there were alternative understandings of space in the 17th century, such as Gassendi's idea that rejects spatial dimensions as primitive and instead derive them from corporeal dimensions, unquote. Colin Chamberlain reminds us that in several passages, Descartes holds that the self may be considered as a disembodied being without hands or eye or flesh or blood or senses. Again, the issue of disembodied here is central in that separation that allowed architecture to flourish. Denise Ferreira da Silva showed us that Descartes, quote, Descartes needs to articulate extended themes, the human body and the sensible objects of knowledge, to write them onto epistemological irrelevance, lest man, the subject of knowledge, also becomes a thing whose existence and essence is determined from without, unquote. The idea of disembodiment is key here for what the abstract understanding of space does to reality, which is precisely to remove the mind from it, placing European man above it as res cogitans and everything else below as res extensa. Architecture has played a central role in this construction, and we only started to properly study it through the lenses of modernity coloniality. Spatial abstraction and its new controls over space has been used as a tool of coloniality and inequality since the world system took shape in the 16th century, and architecture was deeply embedded in this process. We use abstraction to separate our design students from everything they knew before and immerse them in a new set of architectural values. Once unlinked from any previous spatial relations, our studio pedagogy teaches students to master abstraction, almost always disregarding any site context or content in order to only manipulate geometry. Site plans do not register community life. Contours do not tell the history of the land. Plans and sessions are arbitrary narratives that force behaviors on people. Those are the genus-faced powers of architecture. It could be used to envision a better world, but 95% of the time, it is used to reinforce the status quo. If we want to mitigate the erasures embedded in spatial inequality to keep moving towards more inclusive design processes, we need to understand the history of the relationship between design and exclusion. The historical roots of abstraction and disembodiment are intertwined with the historical roots of architectural design and the theological debates of the late 16th and early 17th century. Descartes, the void, coloniality, and design processes are multiple facets of the same process of modernization colonization. Thank you. I look forward to the discussion in a few minutes.